Look, in a sane world with a responsible government, Andrew Cuomo would have been recalled for just lying about the numbers. The numbers were half again higher than the number he gave, and he knew full well how those numbers were constructed. He went looking for plausible deniability. He went looking for a way to get the smallest number possible because he does care about who died in nursing homes and how many people did. Just lying about the number should be enough in any respectable government to get that person removed from office. That's got nothing to do with ordering sick people into nursing homes, which he did. And that killed a lot of people, but who cares? In other news, Dr. Fauci, whose expert advice just a few days ago was that 2 masks were better than 1, now admits that, probably not true. In other news, we're now discovering all kinds of different research studies that show that hydroxychloroquine really does have a significant effect on people. It really does save lives. It really is effective, especially if you catch it early. How many people died because Donald Trump said that this was an effective treatment for COVID-19? Because it is. How many people died because they didn't want Donald Trump to get credit for that particular idea? How many? Who cares, really, when it's said and done? In other news, Amazon, on the first day of Joe Biden's day in office, Amazon volunteered to use their enormous delivery force, which is overtaking the entire world, to help deliver tests and vaccines and all the rest. Why did they do that on January 20th? Because they didn't want to be seen to be helping Donald Trump. How many doses, how many tests could have been delivered to the American people? How many lives could have been saved if they had done this earlier? They had the means to. How many lives could have been saved if they hadn't delayed until Inauguration Day so that they could be seen as handing this present to Joe Biden? How many lives did that cost? Who cares, really? In other news, Joe Biden says that the vaccine program that he inherited from Donald Trump is, quote, in worse shape than we anticipated or expected, unquote. Turns out, though, that some 50 million doses so far have been distributed to the various states, but only 31 million people have been vaccinated. In other words, the Biden administration seems to have lost track of 20 million vaccine doses for COVID-19. 20 million. Gone. The fact that it was accomplished in record time and miracle time has nothing to do with that vulgar guy who was just cheated out of office. So he inherited this awful situation, much worse than we expected or anticipated. And now they can't find 20 million doses? Who cares? Who can be the biggest victim? That's what school is about now. Certainly what school is about in the Los Angeles Unified School District is teaching students how to find their inner victimhood and how to trumpet that louder than anything else, because that is what passes for truth today. It's no longer about telling the truth based on external reality. Now, your social status, your social prestige, your social power, and the degree that teachers consider themselves successful in educating you is predicated on how much of a victim you can make yourself without overstepping the line. And there's a hierarchy. So being a woman is a victim, but being a black person is a greater victim. So a black woman has more victimhood than either of those two. A transgendered black woman has much higher levels of victimhood and therefore much greater moral authority, and you can walk yourself down the line. It's the cult of the victim. It's the worship of the victim. And that is what our education system has become. That's what our politics has become. When Joe Biden talks about things like we're going to administer COVID vaccine along racial guidelines instead of along rational guidelines in terms of the most affected classes, any of the stuff that Mario Cuomo put in place in terms of who gets the vaccine first, and this is just one out of endless examples, then what you're doing is you're basically saying we are going to specially treat the victims. And the reason that we're going to specially treat the victims is because they're our warriors. Those are the foot soldiers. That's the vanguard of our movement, are the victims. And if you wonder why so many rich young white kids are talking about being victimized, or even better, you see, because a rich white kid, especially a rich white male student, can never really be a victim. And so the only way that they can gain any kind of status at all is to become super champions of the victimized. That's why you'll see so many white kids talking about the Black Lives Matter movement, and why you'll see most people protesting Black Lives Matter, at least here in Los Angeles. Most of them at the time were white as can be. They don't have their own victimhood status, so they get a bone thrown to them by being advocates for the victims. And the more hysterical and the more fervent they are in defense of their own oppression of other people, the more modest their gains are in terms of their social status. So that's how it works. History is filled with case after case after case of beaten armies, defeated armies, brooding on this insult, and then coming back and utterly, utterly, utterly devastating, demolishing, and destroying the people that leveled that insult on them when the time was to be magnanimous. And that, of all of this, is the thing that I find most disgusting, is the un-Americanness of it. After the American Revolution, there was no political witch hunts. There were no hangings of Tories, of loyalists to the king. After the American Civil War, there was no prosecution or execution of the enemy leaders. The guy who was in charge of the Andersonville prison camp was hanged. He was the only person who ever suffered any kind of punishment as a result of this national rebellion, this enormous civil war, greatest catastrophe in our history. And all of the leaders of it went free. The vice president of the Confederacy went back to the United States Congress. That kind of magnanimity that results from having liberated concentration camps in Germany and having seen what the Japanese did to their prisoners in Japan, and raising both of those countries up by the hand and helping them get back on the feet. That kind of magnanimity in victory is what America is all about. That kind of fundamental decency and humility is what America is all about. And watching this travesty is not only childish and cruel and spiteful, it's un-American, it's destroying the country. They know it. And they can't help themselves. And the reason they can't help themselves is the reason that children who have been raised as brats can't help themselves when they're deprived of a toy in a Walmart. That's why they will kick and scream and writhe around on the floor, and you have to grab them by the collar and drag them out to the car, because children are not capable of putting the needs of a greater good ahead of their own personal desires. That's the definition of a child. The reason we don't let children vote is because children are not masters of their emotions. And the reason this country is in the trouble it's in now is because people who are no longer masters of their emotions are now running the country. The children are in charge, and they're not good children. They're not healthy children. They're not kind children. They're not mature children. They're mean-spirited, vindictive, bitter, angry, furious, cruel, spiteful little murderers who are bound and determined to take their vengeance out on whatever has offended them. And as with child soldiers all around the world, they are, in fact, the cruelest and the most despicable form of adversary that you can find. And I suspect that they are not going to get what they want out of this. What they are going to get is a much more energized opposition from a population that is already brutalized and filled with a burning righteous anger. And I think it's possible for us to save a lot of souls out there. And what it really just comes down to is it comes down to sharing fathers and having men who are good fathers, having their influence multiplied by a factor of 10 or 100 or 1,000. And when I talk about an academy and the kind of things that would actually happen there, the kind of things I'm talking about are things like fundamental disciplines, the fundamentals of financial discipline, the fundamentals of schedule discipline. All of these things utterly lost on me, and I spent decades and ended up being lucky enough to have the stuff pounded into me by brute force experience, but it doesn't have to be that way. If there was some kind of a overall general structure, I think people would sign up for that. And I know that large numbers of young men are really just dying for this. And when I say dying for it, I'm not exaggerating. They're dying for it. Some of them are committing suicide. Some of them are just utterly lost. They become lost in obsessive video games, or they become lost to emo movements or goth movements, or they're lost to violence or whatever. But they're lost, and they don't have to be, and they shouldn't be. And it would be nice if there were more good dads in America, but there aren't more good dads in America right now. So the good dads that are in America right now are going to have to they're going to have to enlarge their families. I personally think that this is the most important thing that could be done. I believe that all of the politics and all of the destruction of everything that we believe in is predicated on the lack of fundamental core values in the population, the utter lack of a trusted father figure explaining why honor is important, loyalty, courage, ingenuity, self sufficiency, responsibility, discipline, all of these things